The grand piano sat in the corner of Victoria Chen's penthouse apartment, gleaming under the soft lighting. It was a Bosendorfer, one of the finest instruments money could buy, with keys that felt like silk and a sound that could make the hardest heart melt. Victoria had bought it 3 years ago at an auction in Vienna, outbidding a famous orchestra conductor just because she could. Since then, it had served mostly as an expensive decoration, something for guests to admire and occasionally touch with reverent fingers. Tonight, the penthouse was alive with the buzz of conversation and the gentle clink of crystal glasses. Victoria's annual charity gala was in full swing, with the city's wealthiest and most influential people gathered to write checks for a good cause and, more importantly, to be seen doing so. At 32, Victoria had built her tech company from a dorm room idea to a global empire worth billions. She had the kind of success story journalists loved to write about, the brilliant young woman who disrupted an industry and won. What those stories didn't capture was how boring success had become for her, how predictable these people were, how empty these events felt. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights spread below like fallen stars, nursing a glass of champagne she had barely touched. Her black designer dress caught the light when she moved, making her seem to shimmer like a mirage. "Another successful event, Ms. Chen," said Richard, her event coordinator, appearing at her elbow. "We've already raised over $2 million for the Children's Hospital." Victoria nodded, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Wonderful. Though I suspect half of them would donate to a Save the Mosquitoes Foundation if it came with this view and free champagne." Richard chuckled nervously, never quite sure when his boss was joking. "The quartet will be starting in about 10 minutes. They've prepared a lovely selection of—" "Cancel it," Victoria said suddenly, her gaze landing on the untouched piano. "I'm sorry? The quartet. Cancel it. I have a better idea." She handed her champagne glass to a startled Richard and walked toward the center of the room. Victoria picked up a dessert fork and tapped it against her fresh glass of champagne, the clear ring cutting through the chattering voices. The room gradually fell silent as people turned to look at their hostess. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the space. "First, thank you all for coming tonight and for your generosity. The Children's Hospital will put every dollar to good use." She paused as a smattering of applause filled the room. "But I think we could make this evening even more interesting." Victoria walked slowly toward the piano, trailing her fingers along its polished surface. "This piano has a fascinating history. It once belonged to a composer who wrote pieces for kings and queens. Legend says that only someone with a true gift can unlock its full potential. This wasn't entirely true, but Victoria had long ago learned that a good story was often more valuable than the truth. "So, I have a proposition for you all." She smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "If anyone here can play this piano and move me to tears, truly move me, I'll marry them on the spot." A moment of stunned silence fell over the crowd before nervous laughter broke out. Was she joking? Victoria Chen, the woman who had turned down movie stars and royalty, offering her hand in marriage over a piano performance? "I'm completely serious," she added, enjoying the stir she'd caused. "My lawyer is here tonight. We can draw up the paperwork immediately." She gestured to a stunned-looking man in the corner who nearly spilled his drink. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Victoria had just turned a predictable charity event into the most talked-about gathering of the year. "Any takers?" she asked, stepping back from the piano with a challenging smile. After a moment's hesitation, a well-known tech CEO approached the instrument. "I had 6 years of lessons as a kid," he announced, loosening his tie as he sat down. What followed was a painfully rigid rendition of Furley's that made Victoria wince internally, though she maintained a polite smile. When he finished, she shook her head. "I'm afraid I remain tearless. But thank you for your bravery, Tom." Next came a famous actress who played a halting version of Heart and Soul, followed by a hedge fund manager who surprisingly managed a decent but mechanical Bach piece. Victoria responded to each with increasingly theatrical disappointment. "Not even a single tear, I'm afraid. The offer stands." The challenge had created exactly the entertainment she'd hoped for. Guests were laughing, the stuffy atmosphere had dissolved, and for the first time that evening, Victoria wasn't bored. In the service corridor that opened discreetly into the main room, Miguel Alvarez paused in his work. As the night janitor for the building, he was supposed to remain invisible during events, emptying trash bins and cleaning spills without being noticed. At 40, Miguel had perfected the art of blending into the background. His dark uniform helped, as did the fact that most of the wealthy residents barely glanced at the people who kept their lives running smoothly. But the music, even the bad attempts, had drawn him closer to the door. He watched through the crack as another guest massacred a simple melody on the magnificent piano. Miguel's fingers twitched at his side, unconsciously moving to the rhythm of a piece he hadn't played in years but still knew by heart. Once, in another life, he had been destined for concert halls. "Before everything changed, what are you doing?" The sharp whisper came from Darlene, the head of the cleaning staff, making Miguel jump. "Sorry," he mumbled, stepping back from the door. "Just checking if they needed anything cleaned up." Darlene looked skeptical but nodded toward a different corridor. "There's a spill in the west hallway. Take care of that instead of eavesdropping on Ms. Chen's party." Miguel nodded and pushed his cart toward the west hallway, but the sounds of the piano followed him, stirring memories he had spent years trying to forget. Back in the main room, a young software developer was playing a surprisingly tender version of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Victoria found herself actually listening, watching the man's face as he played with genuine feeling. When he finished, there was a moment of appreciative silence before the applause began. "Beautiful," Victoria admitted, "but still no tears. Though you've come the closest so far, David." As the night wore on, the piano challenge became the highlight of the gala. Guests took videos on their phones. Speculation ran wild about whether Victoria was serious, and even those who couldn't play a note enjoyed the impromptu performances. Near midnight, as the event was winding down, Victoria stood by the piano one last time. "It seems my Bosendorfer will keep its secrets tonight," she announced with a theatrical sigh. "Perhaps at next year's gala someone will claim my hand." She laughed, and the guests joined in, knowing it had all been an elaborate game. What none of them saw was Miguel in the service corridor, his cleaning forgotten as he listened to the last notes fade away. His hands were shaking slightly, and there was a look in his eyes that hadn't been there in 15 years. A hunger, a longing so powerful it was almost painful. As the last guest departed and the catering staff began cleaning up, Miguel returned to his regular duties. He emptied trash bins and wiped down surfaces, but his eyes kept returning to the piano. Victoria had retreated to her home office with her event planner to review the night's success. The piano stood alone now, its lid closed, waiting. Miguel finished his assigned tasks and found himself drawn back to the main room. The space was empty, the staff having moved on to other areas of the penthouse. It was just him and the piano now. He approached it slowly, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. His hand hovered over the closed lid, his heart pounding in his chest. Just one touch, he told himself. Just to feel the keys again after all these years. What harm could it do? Little did he know that Victoria Chen had a state-of-the-art security system with cameras covering every inch of her penthouse. Little did he know that his life was about to change forever. Miguel placed his hand on the piano lid and slowly, reverently, lifted it to reveal the keys beneath. Miguel's fingers trembled as they hovered above the piano keys. It had been 15 years since he had last allowed himself to play properly. 15 years of keeping that part of himself locked away, like closing the door on a room full of treasures and throwing away the key. The penthouse was quiet now. The last of the catering staff had moved to the kitchen, and he could hear the distant sounds of dishes being packed away. He should join them, finish his work, and leave. That was the sensible thing to do. Instead, he sat down on the bench, his work uniform feeling strange against the plush cushion where so many wealthy guests had sat earlier. The piano seemed to wait for him, patient and knowing. Just once, he whispered to himself in the empty room, just to remember. He began with a simple scale, his fingers remembering their way across the keys even after all this time. The notes rang out, pure and clear, and something inside Miguel's chest loosened, like a knot finally coming undone. Before he knew it, he had moved from scales to a nocturne, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first piece he had mastered as a teenager. His fingers stumbled at first, missing notes, struggling to find their old grace. But then muscle memory took over, and the music began to flow. In her home office, Victoria was reviewing donation figures with Richard when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of her piano being played. But unlike the amateur attempts from earlier in the evening, this was different. Despite some initial hesitation, there was a depth to the playing, a soul behind the notes. "What's that?" Richard asked, looking up from his tablet. Victoria held up a hand for silence, listening intently. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." She stood and moved quietly toward the door. Back at the piano, Miguel had forgotten everything, where he was, the risk he was taking, the fact that he was supposed to be working. The music had taken him back to another time, another life. He had finished the nocturne and moved on to something more challenging, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece that had once been his signature. His hands remembered the thunder of those opening chords, the cascading middle section, the haunting return to the theme. As he played, tears began to stream down his face, years of buried grief and lost dreams rising to the surface with each note. Victoria stood in the shadow of the hallway, watching the man in the janitor's uniform transform before her eyes. Gone was the invisible worker who emptied trash and mopped floors. In his place sat an artist, drawing sounds from her piano that she had never heard it make before, not even when played by professionals she had hired for parties. Miguel reached the piece's climax, his body swaying with the music, completely unaware of his audience. The final chords resonated through the room, hanging in the air even after his fingers had stilled on the keys. In the silence that followed, he heard a soft sound, someone breathing. His head snapped up to see Victoria Chen standing a few feet away, her eyes wide and a strange expression on her face. Miguel jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over the bench. "Ms. Chen, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have. I'll go right now." "Wait," Victoria said, her voice quiet but firm. She walked toward him and Miguel braced himself for anger, for accusations of overstepping, for being fired on the spot. Instead, she asked, "Who are you?" Miguel swallowed hard. "Miguel Alvarez. I'm the night janitor for this floor. I've worked in the building for 3 years. "That's not what I mean," Victoria said, her eyes never leaving his face. "Who are you that you can play like that? That wasn't amateur hour. That was—" She struggled to find the right words. That was something else entirely. Miguel looked down at his hands, calloused from years of manual labor but still somehow remembering the music. "It was a long time ago," he said softly. Victoria gestured to the piano bench. "Sit, please, tell me." Against his better judgment, Miguel sat back down, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria joined him on the bench, careful to leave space between them. "I was a pianist," he began, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so many years of silence. "In Mexico, where I grew up. I studied at the National Conservatory of Music in Mexico City. My teacher said I had potential. There were talks of international competitions, maybe a career in Europe." "What happened?" Victoria asked. Miguel's eyes grew distant. "Life. My father got sick, cancer. The medical bills piled up. My mother had to stop working to care for him. I was 19, the oldest of 4 children. Someone had to provide." "So you gave it up," Victoria said. It wasn't a question, Miguel nodded. "I took whatever jobs I could find. Construction, restaurants, delivery. Eventually, I saved enough to come to the United States. The plan was to work for a few years, send money home, then maybe go back to music." He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "That was 20 years ago. My father passed away despite everything. My mother raised my siblings alone with the money I sent. 2 of them went to college, the first in our family." Victoria was silent for a moment. "And your hands? These aren't the hands of someone who hasn't worked hard." Miguel looked down at his calloused fingers, the nails cut short for practical reasons. "Piano hands don't pay the bills." "But they remember." "They always remember." "You have a family here now?" Victoria asked. "A daughter," Miguel said, and for the first time since Victoria had appeared, he smiled. "Lucia. She's 17, about to start applying to colleges." Pride crept into his voice. "She's smart. Much smarter than I ever was. She wants to study engineering. Victoria nodded, processing this information. Then she said, "Play something else." Miguel hesitated. "Ms. Chen, I should really get back to work. If my supervisor finds out I own the building," Victoria interrupted. "Consider this part of your job tonight. Play something else, please." The please surprised them both. Slowly, Miguel turned back to the piano. This time he chose something different, Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece one of the guests had attempted earlier. But where that performance had been merely pleasant, Miguel's interpretation breathed life into every note. The piece flowed like water, gentle and clear, building to its climax with a restrained passion that was all the more powerful for its subtlety. Victoria closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When the final notes faded away, she opened them again to find Miguel watching her. "You're crying," he said, sounding surprised. Victoria touched her cheek, feeling the wetness there with genuine shock. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried. Certainly not in front of someone else, it seems, she said with a small smile. "That you've won my ridiculous challenge." Miguel looked confused for a moment before remembering her announcement at the party. His eyes widened. "Ms. Chen, that was just a joke, a game for your guests. I wasn't even part of the party. I didn't mean to." "Relax," Victoria said with a soft laugh. "I'm not actually expecting you to marry me, though technically you're the only one who met the criteria." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "Do you have a job tomorrow night?" The abrupt change of subject caught Miguel off guard. "Yes, I work here 6 nights a week. Call in sick," Victoria said. It wasn't a request. She walked to a sleek desk in the corner of the room and scribbled something on a piece of paper. Returning to Miguel, she handed it to him. "This is my private number. Come to this address at 7 tomorrow evening. We have things to discuss." Miguel stared at the paper in his hand. "Ms. Chen, I don't understand." "Neither do I entirely," she admitted. "But I know talent when I see it, Mr. Alvarez, and I know wasted potential when I hear about it." Her eyes held his. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." With that, she turned and walked back toward her office, leaving Miguel alone with the piano once more. He looked down at the paper in his hand, then at the magnificent instrument before him. Whatever was happening, whatever Victoria Chen had in mind, Miguel knew his life had just taken an unexpected turn. As he carefully closed the lid of the piano and stood to return to his duties, he couldn't help but wonder. After 15 years of silence, why had he chosen tonight to play again? And why did it feel like the music had been waiting for him all along? Miguel didn't sleep much that night. After finishing his shift, he rode the bus home to his small apartment in a working-class neighborhood across town. The whole way, he kept taking out Victoria Chen's note, looking at the elegant handwriting and the address, an upscale restaurant he had heard of but never dreamed of entering. It was nearly 6 in the morning when he unlocked his apartment door. The small 2-bedroom space was neat but worn, with second-hand furniture and walls that needed repainting. Still, it was home, and Miguel had worked hard to keep a roof over their heads. He tried to be quiet, but as he put his keys on the kitchen counter, a sleepy voice called out, "Dad? That you?" "Sorry, mija," Miguel replied. "Didn't mean to wake you." Lucia appeared in the hallway, her dark hair messy from sleep, already dressed in her school uniform, a crisp white shirt and navy skirt. At 17, she looked more and more like her mother every day. The thought brought the familiar mixture of pain and warmth to Miguel's chest. "You're late," Lucia said, glancing at the clock. "Everything okay?" Miguel hesitated. "Yes, just an interesting night." He walked to the refrigerator and took out eggs. "Breakfast?" "Already had cereal," Lucia said, watching her father curiously. "What happened? You have a weird look on your face." Miguel cracked eggs into a pan, buying time to decide what to tell her. Finally, he said, "I played a piano last night." Lucia's eyes widened. She knew about his past. He had told her the stories over the years, but she had never heard him play. Not really. Once or twice he had shown her a simple tune on a keyboard at a mall, but nothing that revealed what he had once been capable of. "Where? How?" she asked, sitting at their small kitchen table. As the eggs cooked, Miguel told her about the charity gala, Victoria Chen's challenge, and how he had found himself alone with the magnificent Bösendorfer after everyone had gone. "And then she caught me," he concluded, sliding the eggs onto a plate. "Oh no, Lucia's hand flew to her mouth. Did she fire you? Miguel took out the note and placed it on the table. She invited me to dinner. Lucia stared at the paper, then back at her father. Victoria Chen? The Victoria Chen, the billionaire tech lady who's always in the news? When Miguel nodded, she let out a low whistle. Dad, that's... What does she want? I don't know, Miguel admitted. But she heard me play and... He trailed off, remembering the tears in Victoria's eyes. You have to go, Lucia said firmly. Miguel shook his head. I have work tonight, and it's probably nothing. Rich people are... They get bored. They find something interesting for a moment, then move on. Lucia fixed him with a stern look that made her look startlingly like his own mother. Call in sick. You never miss work. One night won't kill you. She picked up the note. This could be something important. Dad? Miguel looked at his daughter's hopeful face and felt something stir inside him, the same feeling he'd experienced when his fingers first touched the keys of Victoria's piano. Possibility. After so many years of just getting by, of narrowing his expectations to match his circumstances, possibility felt almost dangerous. Maybe, he said non-committally, taking a bite of his eggs. We'll see. Lucia rolled her eyes, knowing that tone. Well, I have to get to school. Think about it, okay? She grabbed her backpack and kissed him on the cheek. And for what it's worth, I'd love to hear you play sometime. Really play. After she left, Miguel sat alone in the quiet apartment, Victoria's note on the table before him. Against his better judgment, he reached for his phone. At exactly 7 that evening, Miguel stood outside the glass room, the restaurant Victoria had specified. He had taken a long shower after waking up at noon, trimmed his mustache, and put on his only suit, a navy blue one he'd bought years ago for Lucia's middle school graduation. It was a little tight now and definitely not fashionable, but it was clean and pressed. A valet approached and Miguel quickly shook his head. Just meeting someone, he explained, not mentioning that he had taken the bus here. Inside, the restaurant was a temple of modern luxury, all gleaming surfaces and soft lighting, with views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. A host in an impeccable suit looked Miguel over with a slightly raised eyebrow. I'm here to meet Ms. Chen, Miguel said, feeling increasingly out of place. The host's demeanor changed instantly. Ah yes, Ms. Chen is expecting you. This way, please. Miguel followed him through the restaurant, painfully aware of his scuffed shoes and outdated suit amid the designer clothes around him. The host led him to a private dining room in the back, separated from the main area by frosted glass doors. Victoria sat alone at a table set for 2, looking at something on her phone. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than Miguel's monthly rent. Her hair swept back in an elegant twist. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. Mr. Alvarez, she said, putting her phone away. I wasn't sure you would come. I wasn't sure either, Miguel admitted. She gestured to the chair across from her. Please sit. As Miguel took his seat, a waiter appeared with water and wine. Victoria ordered for both of them in a way that was efficient rather than rude. When they were alone again, an awkward silence fell. Why am I here, Miss Chen? Miguel finally asked. Victoria studied him for a moment. Directness. I appreciate that. She took a sip of water. Last night you mentioned your daughter wants to study engineering. Miguel nodded, surprised at the direction of the conversation. Yes, Lucia. She's very bright. Where is she applying to college? State schools mostly, Miguel said. She's worked hard for scholarships, but... He trailed off, not wanting to delve into their financial limitations. Victoria nodded as if he had finished the thought. And if money were no object? Where would she want to go? Miguel looked at her suspiciously. Why are you asking about my daughter? Humor me, Victoria said. After a pause, Miguel answered. MIT, she talks about MIT all the time. Their robotics program. Victoria smiled slightly. Good choice. She opened a folder that had been sitting on the table and pushed a document across to him. Take a look at this. Miguel picked it up cautiously. It was some kind of legal document with Victoria's company logo at the top. As he skimmed it, his confusion grew. The Chen Foundation Music Scholarship? I don't understand. I'm establishing a new scholarship, Victoria explained, for musically gifted students who want to pursue other fields of study. The first recipient will be Lucia Alvarez, full tuition to MIT plus living expenses, books, everything she needs. Miguel stared at her. Why would you do this? You don't even know my daughter. I know her father has extraordinary talent, Victoria said, and I know what it's like to have a parent sacrifice everything for you. Something flashed across her face, a vulnerability quickly masked. My proposal has conditions, of course. Of course it does, Miguel said, his initial shock giving way to wariness. The waiter returned with their appetizers, momentarily halting the conversation. When they were alone again, Victoria continued. I want you to teach me to play the piano, real lessons twice a week. Miguel blinked in surprise. That's it? You're offering my daughter a full ride to MIT so I can teach you piano? Victoria's lips curved slightly. I'm a very bad student. It's quite a sacrifice on your part. When Miguel didn't smile back, she sighed. There's more. I want you to play again. Professionally. That's not possible, Miguel said immediately. It's been too long. I'm not the pianist I was. You're better, Victoria said simply. What I heard last night wasn't just technique. It was life, experience, things you didn't have at 19. Miguel shook his head. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about investments, Victoria replied. And you, Mr. Alvarez, are an undervalued asset. She leaned forward. I have connections to the City Symphony, to concert halls, to people who matter in the music world. I can open doors. Why? Miguel asked, the question that had been burning in him since he'd arrived. Why would you do any of this? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its businesslike edge. Because when you played last night, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. She met his eyes. And I think you felt it too. Miguel couldn't deny it. Playing again had awakened something he had thought was dead. Think about it, Victoria said, seeing his hesitation. Talk to your daughter. The scholarship is hers regardless. I'll see to the paperwork this week. The rest is up to you. The waiter brought their main courses and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Victoria asked about Lucia, about Miguel's journey from Mexico, about the pieces he loved to play. For brief moments, they were just two people sharing a meal, the vast differences in their lives temporarily forgotten. As the evening ended and Victoria's driver waited to take her home, she handed Miguel a small key. My private elevator. Come to the penthouse tomorrow at 7. We'll begin your first lesson, or you can return the key and we'll forget the whole thing. She smiled, a genuine one this time. Though I hope you'll come. Miguel held the key tightly, feeling its weight, so much heavier than its small size would suggest. Thank you for dinner, Miss Chen. Victoria, she corrected him. If you're going to tell me I have no musical talent whatsoever, you should at least use my first name. Despite himself, Miguel smiled. Good night, Victoria. As her car pulled away, Miguel stood on the sidewalk, the key in one hand and his phone in the other. He needed to call Lucia. Whether this was the beginning of something extraordinary or simply an eccentric billionaire's passing fancy, his daughter deserved to know that her future was now secure, and maybe, just maybe, his own dormant dreams weren't as impossible as he had believed for all these years. The key to Victoria's penthouse felt heavy in Miguel's pocket as he rode the bus home. His mind raced with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. The conversation with Lucia when he arrived home only intensified his inner turmoil. MIT, Lucia repeated, her eyes wide with disbelief after Miguel explained Victoria's offer. They sat at their small kitchen table, a half-eaten pizza between them. Dad, that's impossible. Apparently not for Victoria Chen, Miguel said, still not entirely believing it himself. And she wants you to teach her piano? Lucia shook her head in amazement. That's crazy. She also wants me to play again, professionally. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. Lucia set down her pizza slice, studying her father's face. And what do you want? The question caught Miguel off guard. For so many years, what he wanted hadn't been part of the equation. Life had been about survival, about putting food on the table, about making sure Lucia had opportunities he didn't have. I don't know, he admitted. It's been so long, Mija. I'm not the same person I was back then. Play something for me, Lucia said suddenly. Right now. Miguel looked around their small apartment. We don't have a piano. Mrs. Patel next door does. That old upright she never uses. She'd let you play it. Lucia was already on her feet, determination in her eyes. I want to hear you, Dad, really hear you. An hour later, Miguel sat at Mrs. Patel's dusty upright piano, with its slightly yellow keys and the faint smell of incense that permeated everything in her apartment. Lucia sat on a faded armchair nearby, while their elderly neighbor bustled around in the kitchen making tea. "What should I play?" Miguel asked, his fingers hovering over the keys. Lucia shrugged. "Anything. Whatever you feel." Miguel closed his eyes, letting his hands find their place. He began with something simple, Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 16 in C major. The piano was badly out of tune, the action stiff from disuse, but none of that mattered once he started playing. The music flowed through him, rusty at first, then with growing confidence. He moved from Mozart to Chopin, then to a piece his father had loved, a folk melody from their hometown in Mexico that Miguel had arranged for piano as a teenager. When he finally stopped and opened his eyes, he found Lucia watching him with tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Patel stood in the doorway, teacups forgotten in her hands, looking equally moved. "That's who you are, Dad," Lucia said softly. "That's who you've always been." Later that night, after they'd returned to their apartment, Lucia handed him Victoria's key. "Go tomorrow," she said. "Not for her, not even for me. For yourself." Miguel closed his fingers around the key and nodded. The following evening, Miguel stood in Victoria's private elevator, his heart pounding as it climbed to the penthouse. He had called in sick to work again, something he'd never done on consecutive nights before. The night supervisor had been understanding but warned him not to make it a habit. When the doors opened directly into Victoria's apartment, he was surprised to find the space transformed. The furniture had been rearranged, creating an open area around the Bösendorfer with 2 chairs nearby. Music stands and sheet music were arranged neatly, and soft lighting focused on the piano. Victoria herself looked different too. Dressed in simple black pants and a gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, feet bare. Without her usual business attire and perfect makeup, she seemed younger, more approachable. "You came," she said, looking genuinely pleased. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Miguel admitted, stepping into the apartment. He held up a worn leather folder. "But I brought some teaching materials. If we're doing this, we should do it properly." Victoria smiled, always the professional. "Would you like something to drink before we start?" Miguel shook his head. "Let's see what we're working with first." They moved to the piano, and Victoria sat on the bench, her posture already revealing her lack of training. Miguel gently corrected her position, back straight but not stiff, shoulders relaxed, wrists level with the keyboard. "Have you played it all before?" he asked. "A few lessons as a child," Victoria admitted. "I hated every minute of it." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. They started with the basics, scales, finger positions, simple exercises. Victoria was a quick study but impatient, wanting to jump ahead to actual pieces before mastering the fundamentals. "That's not how this works," Miguel told her firmly when she complained about the repetitive exercises. "You wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training your muscles first." Victoria gave him an appraising look. "You know you're quite different as a teacher, more authoritative." "Is that a problem?" Miguel asked. Victoria shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "Not at all. It's refreshing, actually. Most people just tell me what they think I want to hear." By the end of the 2-hour lesson, Victoria had mastered a simple piece, barely more than a children's song, but she played it with focused concentration. When she finished, she looked up at Miguel with unexpected delight, like a child who'd just performed their first magic trick. "I did it," she said, sounding surprised at her own accomplishment. "You did," Miguel agreed. "You have good hands for piano, strong fingers. From typing code for 18 hours a day in my 20s, Victoria explained. She flexed her fingers. Different keyboards, similar principles. As Miguel packed up his teaching materials, Victoria moved to a sleek desk in the corner and returned with an envelope. "The scholarship paperwork for Lucia," she said, handing it to him. "Everything's arranged. She just needs to complete the standard MIT application for formality's sake, but her place is secure." Miguel took the envelope, emotion threatening to overcome him. "Thank you," he said simply. "I have something else," Victoria continued. She handed him a second envelope. "The City Symphony is holding auditions for guest soloists next month. I've arranged for you to have a slot." Miguel's grip tightened on the envelope. "Victoria, I told you..." You don't have to do it, she interrupted. But the opportunity is there if you want it. She hesitated, then added, I heard you play, Miguel. The world deserves to hear it too. The directness of her gaze made Miguel look away first. I should go. It's getting late. Victoria nodded. Thursday, same time? Thursday, Miguel confirmed, heading toward the elevator. And Miguel? Victoria called after him. When he turned, she said, Bring some music you love. After my lesson, I want you to play for me again. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Twice a week, Miguel would arrive at Victoria's penthouse at 7. They would work for 2 hours on her lessons, Victoria proving to be a dedicated, if sometimes frustrated, student. And then Miguel would play for her. Those moments, when it was just him and the magnificent Bosendorfer and Victoria, sitting quietly in a nearby chair with her eyes closed, became something Miguel looked forward to with an intensity that surprised him. He began bringing different pieces each time, challenging himself more, remembering works he had once known by heart. At home, Lucia watched the change in her father with joy and amazement. The scholarship paperwork was completed, her MIT acceptance secured. But more than that, she saw Miguel standing taller, smiling more easily, humming melodies as he cooked dinner, things he hadn't done in years. You should invite her over for dinner, Lucia suggested one evening as they washed dishes together. Victoria. Miguel nearly dropped the plate he was drying. Here, why would she want to come here? Lucia rolled her eyes. Because that's what friends do, Dad. They visit each other's homes. We're not friends, Miguel said automatically. She's my employer. Uh-huh, Lucia said skeptically. That's why you talk about her all the time and come home with that weird smile after your lessons. What weird smile? Miguel demanded. That one, Lucia said, pointing to his face with a soapy finger. Right there. Miguel changed the subject, but Lucia's words stayed with him. What exactly was happening between him and Victoria Chen? They came from entirely different worlds. She moved through life with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to worry about paying rent or buying groceries. And yet, there were moments when she mastered a difficult passage and looked to him for approval, or when she listened to him play with such genuine appreciation in her eyes, or when she laughed at something he said in a way that suggested she wasn't used to laughing much, when those differences seemed to matter less. The audition date for the symphony was approaching, and despite his initial resistance, Miguel had begun to prepare seriously. He practiced at Victoria's whenever he could, sometimes coming early before their lessons or staying late after. She had given him a key and the code to her private elevator, telling him to use the piano whenever he wanted. One evening, he arrived to find Victoria seated at the piano, not playing but just sitting there, staring at the keys. She didn't hear him enter, and for a moment he simply watched her. This powerful, complicated woman who had upended his carefully constructed life. Victoria? He said softly. She looked up, startled, and he was shocked to see tears in her eyes. Miguel, I didn't hear you come in. What's wrong? He asked, moving closer. Victoria wiped at her eyes quickly. Nothing. It's silly. When he continued looking at her expectantly, she sighed. Today would have been my father's birthday. He loved music. He's the one who made me take piano lessons as a child. Miguel sat beside her on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. Tell me about him. Victoria was quiet for so long that Miguel thought she wouldn't answer. But then she began to speak, her voice soft with memory. He worked all the time, building his company from nothing. We didn't have much when I was little before the business took off. But he always made time for music. As she spoke, Miguel realized that for all her wealth and power, Victoria Chen was, in many ways, just as lonely as he had been all these years. Different circumstances, similar emptiness. Without thinking, he placed his hands on the keys and began to play a gentle lullaby his mother had sung to him as a child. Victoria fell silent, watching his hands move across the keyboard. When he finished, she said quietly, I think my father would have liked you. Miguel looked at her, really looked at her, not as a billionaire, not as his benefactor, but as a woman sitting beside him sharing a moment of genuine connection. I think, he said carefully, that Lucia is right. You should come to dinner at our apartment sometime. Victoria looked surprised, then pleased. I'd like that, she said. Very much. The invitation to dinner hung in the air between Miguel and Victoria for several days. Neither mentioned it during their next lesson, though something had shifted between them, a new warmth, a lowering of guards. It wasn't until the end of the evening, as Miguel was gathering his teaching materials, that Victoria finally asked, "Was that dinner invitation still open?" Miguel looked up, surprised she had remembered. "Of course. How about Saturday?" "Saturday," Victoria agreed with a small smile. "Should I bring anything?" Miguel thought about it. "Just yourself." When he told Lucia about their upcoming dinner guest, she nearly dropped the textbook she was holding. "Victoria Chen is coming here? To our apartment?" She looked around their modest living space with sudden panic. "Dad, we need to clean. And get new everything." Miguel laughed. "She's not coming to judge our furniture, mija. She's coming for dinner with us." But even Miguel found himself looking at their apartment with new eyes as he cleaned that Saturday. The worn sofa, the small table with its mismatched chairs, the faded curtains Lucia's mother had picked out years ago. It was humble but clean, filled with photographs and small mementos of their life together. At precisely 7, there was a knock at their door. Miguel opened it to find Victoria standing there in simple jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, holding a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. "I know you said not to bring anything," she said with a small shrug, "but my mother taught me never to arrive empty-handed." Miguel invited her in, surprised at how nervous he felt suddenly. Victoria looked around with genuine interest, moving to examine the photos on the wall. "Is this Lucia?" she asked, pointing to a picture of a grinning 7-year-old missing her front teeth. "Yes," Miguel said, "and that's her mother Anna beside her." Victoria studied the photograph of the beautiful woman with Lucia's smile. "She's lovely. Will she be joining us?" A moment of silence fell before Miguel answered softly. "Anna passed away when Lucia was 9. Cancer." Victoria turned to him, regret in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "It's okay," Miguel assured her. "It was a long time ago." Lucia saved the moment by emerging from the kitchen. "Hi, Miss Chen. Dinner's almost ready. I hope you like enchiladas. They're my dad's specialty." Victoria smiled warmly. "I love them. And please call me Victoria." Dinner was surprisingly easy, the conversation flowing naturally. Lucia talked about her plans for MIT, her excitement about the robotics program, her dreams of designing prosthetics that could help people. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering insights about the tech industry. "My father would be amazed," Miguel said at one point, watching his daughter talk animatedly with one of the most powerful women in the business world, his granddaughter at MIT. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said, her eyes on Lucia with real admiration. "You've done an incredible job raising her." After dinner, they moved to the living room with coffee. Lucia excused herself to finish a school project, leaving Miguel and Victoria alone. "Thank you for coming," Miguel said. "I know this isn't what you're used to." Victoria looked around the small apartment with its family photos and well-worn furniture. "You know, in some ways it reminds me of where I grew up, before my father's company took off." She smiled at his surprised expression. "We weren't always rich, Miguel." "The audition is next week," Miguel said, changing the subject. "I've been practicing, but you're nervous," Victoria finished for him. "That's normal. What if I fail?" The question came out before he could stop it. Victoria studied him for a moment. "Then you'll have tried. Isn't that what you always tell me when I get frustrated with a difficult passage? That the attempt matters more than the outcome?" Miguel smiled ruefully, using my own words against me. "Is it working?" "A little." When Victoria left that night, something had changed between them, something neither was quite ready to name. She paused at the door, looking back at Miguel. "Good luck next week. Though you don't need it, will you come?" he asked suddenly. "To the audition?" Victoria looked surprised, then pleased. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The day of the audition dawned bright and clear. Miguel had taken the day off from work, spending the morning practicing in Victoria's penthouse while she was at her office. His hands felt good, steady and strong, the music flowing through him like a current. Lucia had wanted to come to the audition, but it was closed to the public. Only the judging panel would be present. Miguel had asked Victoria to use her influence to get Lucia in, but even Victoria had limits to her power. "I'll be right outside," Lucia promised as she hugged him goodbye. "And whatever happens, I'm so proud of you, Dad." The concert hall was grand and intimidating with its polished wood and plush seats. Miguel waited backstage, his heart pounding. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see the panel of 5 judges sitting in the otherwise empty hall. 4 older men in suits and a middle-aged woman with severe glasses. And there, slipping in quietly through a side door, was Victoria. She took a seat at the back, nodding encouragingly when she caught his eye. The stage manager called his name, and Miguel walked out to the magnificent grand piano at center stage. The spotlights were blinding, and for a moment, he felt dizzy with the unreality of it all. Him, Miguel Alvarez, night janitor, about to audition for the City Symphony. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. The hall fell completely silent. Miguel had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Bold, perhaps too bold for someone who hadn't performed in public for 20 years. But it was a piece he had once loved, had once mastered as a young man full of dreams. The first chords rang out deep and resonant. His hands moved with a will of their own, finding the notes, building the phrases. The years fell away, and he was no longer a middle-aged janitor, but simply a musician, speaking the language he had been born to speak. He played with all the technical skill of his youth, but with something more, the depth that comes only from having lived, loved, lost, and endured. Every note carried the weight of his journey. His father's illness, leaving his homeland, Anna's death, the years of hard work, Lucia's smile, and now, improbably, Victoria entering his life like a surprising key change in a familiar melody. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the woman judge removed her glasses, wiping her eyes. One of the men was nodding slowly, a look of appreciation on his face. "Thank you, Mr. Alvarez," the head judge said, his voice warmer than it had been for the previous candidates. "That was quite extraordinary. We'll be in touch." Miguel bowed slightly and left the stage. In the corridor outside, Lucia was waiting, having listened through the door. She threw her arms around him. "Dad, that was amazing. I've never heard anything so beautiful." Over Lucia's shoulder, Miguel saw Victoria approaching. She didn't say anything, just looked at him with eyes that held something he hadn't seen there before. "How did it feel?" she asked simply. Miguel considered the question. "Like coming home," he answered. 3 weeks later, Miguel stood on the same stage, but this time the hall was filled with people. He wore a new suit, Victoria's insistence, and his hair was freshly cut. In the front row sat Lucia, beaming with pride, and beside her, Victoria, elegant in a midnight blue dress. As the conductor raised his baton and the orchestra began the opening of Rachmaninoff's concerto, Miguel caught Victoria's eye one last time before turning to the piano. In that brief glance was a world of unspoken understanding. Later, at the reception following his debut performance with the symphony, Victoria found him in a quiet corner, away from the crowd of well-wishers. "You were magnificent," she said softly. "Thank you," Miguel replied, "for everything. None of this would have happened without you." Victoria shook her head. "No. I may have opened the door, but you walked through it on your own." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Victoria said with a small smile, "Remember that ridiculous challenge I made at my party? About marrying anyone who could move me to tears with the piano?" Miguel laughed. "How could I forget? It changed my life." "Mine too," Victoria admitted. She looked at him with sudden seriousness. "I never thought I'd find someone who saw past all of this." She gestured vaguely at herself, at the wealthy crowd around them. "Someone who would invite me to enchiladas in a small apartment and make me feel more at home than I felt in years." Miguel's heart beat faster. "What are you saying, Victoria?" She took a deep breath. "I'm saying, I don't want to be just your student anymore, or your benefactor. I want—" She was interrupted by Lucia bouncing over, excitement radiating from her. "Dad, the conductor wants to talk to you about next season." "Oh, sorry, did I interrupt something?" Victoria smiled. "Nothing that can't wait." As Miguel was pulled away by his daughter, he looked back at Victoria, who mouthed, "We'll talk later." 6 months later, as summer turned to fall, Miguel helped Lucia pack the last of her things for MIT. Victoria arrived to drive them to the airport, her car already loaded with the extras they couldn't fit in their luggage. As they stood in the apartment saying final goodbyes, Lucia pulled something from her backpack, a small velvet box. "What's this?" Miguel asked. "Something I think Mom would have wanted you to have," Lucia said, her eyes shining with tears and joy. Open it when I'm gone, okay? At the airport, after Lucia had gone through security, waving one last time before disappearing into the crowd, Victoria took Miguel's hand. She's going to change the world, Victoria said. She already has, Miguel replied, thinking of how his daughter's determination had pushed him back toward music, toward life, toward the woman now standing beside him. Back in the car, Miguel finally opened Lucia's box. Inside was a simple silver ring and a note in his daughter's handwriting. Time for your own happy ending. Dad, ask her. Miguel looked at Victoria in the driver's seat, this unlikely companion on his journey, and smiled. Some challenges, it turned out, were worth accepting.